Genesis 18, continue reading. Do me a favor.
And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a son when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you. At this time next year, Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh.
Understand the implication of this. I brought this up last week, but because my time was running out, let me unpack this. Notice that Sarah is in the tent when she hears God telling Abraham, next year I'm going to come and Sarah will give birth. She laughed. She's like, what? I'm 89 years old. What does that tell you about Sarah's understanding of God? She didn't know how powerful her God was. Because if she assumed God was all powerful, would she have laughed at the notion that God could cause her to get pregnant even at the age of 89? So here what you're learning from the biblical account is that like us, these human prophets, human messengers, human servants of God, their knowledge of God also was imperfect and it was being perfected. The more they walked with God, the more they spoke with God, the more they experienced God, the more they understood God. But they didn't come out of their mother's womb with perfect theology. Because if God told you, next year your wife is going to have a son, are you going to laugh in his face? No. Of course, God, if you said it, it's going to happen because you're almighty. But Sarah laughed. You have a son? And then God says, why'd Sarah laugh? And then she denied it. What does that tell you? I didn't laugh. If she knew that God is all-seeing, do you think she would lie and deny that I laughed? That tells you that she didn't really know God as much as she should have known him, but her knowledge is growing. Yeah, you did laugh. You're even trying to lie to me? And it's not just with Sarah. You find this throughout the Old Testament. You find it, for example, with Cain. Cain, when God says, where's your brother? If Cain really understood that God is all-seeing and present everywhere, would he say, well, how should I know? Am I my brother's keeper? Would he have said that?
No.
So what does that tell you? That Cain doesn't really know God. Because if he did, the last thing he would do is say, well, I don't know. God, you know fully well what happened to my brother. You don't need to ask. Because you see all things. And just to make sure that Cain knows that God knows all things, he said right after that, what have you done? The blood of your brother cries out to me. On top of that, you tried to cover over the fact that you murdered him. What have you done? So why did God ask? Because he's going to expose how corrupt Cain is at heart. Instead of repenting, he tried to hide his sin, thinking that God was unaware of his crime. So Cain learned the hard way, did he not? Man, nothing is hidden from this God. What about Jonah? What about Jonah? What about Jonah? When God told Jonah to go to the great city of Nineveh, what did Jonah do? He jumped on a boat headed to Tarshish, which people say was Spain, to escape the presence of Yahweh. That's what it says in Jonah 1. What does that tell you about Jonah's understanding of God's presence? He thought that God's presence is limited to time and space, because after all, if he comprehended that God is omnipresent, the most foolish thing you could do is get on a boat to escape God's presence. Because even before you get there, God is already there. So he too learned a valuable theological lesson. What David before him already knew. Where can I flee from your spirit? Where can I go from your presence? Even though that was written before Jonah, obviously Jonah didn't learn that lesson. Because had he read Psalm 139 and understood it and meditated upon it, man, if I go to Tarshish, God is there, so where am I going to escape God? So here you're seeing these people learning about God, growing in understanding of God, so that their thoughts of God being perfected over time as they experience God more and more in their lives. That will also happen to you and me. The more we walk with God, the more we fellowship with God, the more we speak with God, the more we love God, the more we'll know God. It's inevitable. You're going to grow. Because God is infinite. You can't take in God completely in one setting. You can't even take him in all eternity. So all eternity, you're going to constantly keep growing in your knowledge and intimacy of the Lord.
I think it's just kind of a human condition. We try and convince ourselves that God's somewhere else doing something he's not watching us, you know.
So why would you think God is not watching you if you believe that God is all-seeing and all-knowing?
Because it's something that we, I don't want to say struggle with or something.
So, but why would Adam and Eve struggle with it if you just said they were perfect, had no sin prior to that moment?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Because, again, your assumption is that they would have had the knowledge that God is omnipresent, and I'd say, where'd you get that assumption from? Doesn't mean that because they're in a state of innocence and hadn't sinned, that they comprehended God fully. They're still creatures. That's impossible. Just because Adam and Eve happen to be in a state of innocence, that does not mean they're omniscient and therefore they know God inside and out. They're still babes in understanding of God. And I would actually argue the contrary. The fact that God appears and disappears may have led to the impression that God is not omnipresent, because why does he have to appear and disappear? Right? So if I just read the text, God is appearing and disappearing. Oh, okay, he's not here. Oh, then he shows up. Hey, God, glad to see you again. So that would actually lead me to assume that God is not omnipresent, that he goes from place to place. He shows up here and then he's gone. Well, why would he if he's omnipresent? He could be here and there and everywhere, but he's appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing. So that actually would lead them to assume the contrary. He's not omnipresent. You with me there? Everyone with me there?
Yes.
And by the way, if you want these kind of insights, ask the Holy Spirit to give it to you. Open my mind and my eyes to understand and see, and he'll give you that insight. He'll either give it to you directly by just looking at the text or through teachers.